soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated Carol's face as she entered Ethan's room late one night. Her son lay peacefully asleep, his chest rising and falling with each gentle breath. Carol moved quietly across the room, careful not to disturb him. She picked up a handmade quilt, lovingly crafted by Ethan's grandmother, and draped it over his sleeping form. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. As she tucked the quilt around him, Carol began to whisper a story. It was a tale of a hero who faced his fears and emerged victorious. Her voice was low and soothing, barely audible in the stillness of the night. Once upon a time, she began, there was a young warrior who doubted his own strength. While she spoke, Carol's mind drifted to her own experiences as a nurse. She thought of the countless patients she had cared for over the years, each one leaving an indelible mark on her heart. There was the elderly man who fought cancer with unwavering optimism, the young mother who survived a devastating car accident, and the child who overcame a rare genetic disorder. These stories of resilience and courage had shaped Carol, inspiring her to face her own challenges with determination. In his sleep, Ethan seemed to respond to his mother's voice. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, as if her words were seeping into his dreams. Carol paused in her storytelling, watching her son's peaceful expression. She realized that even in sleep, Ethan found comfort in her presence. Carol continued her tale, weaving elements of her own experiences into the narrative. She spoke of the hero's doubts and fears, mirroring Ethan's own struggles with anxiety. As the story progressed, she described how the hero learned to harness his inner strength, much like she hoped Ethan would do. The room was filled with a sense of tranquility, a bubble of safety created by a mother's love and a child's trust. Carol's whispered words painted vivid pictures of bravery and perseverance, qualities she desperately wanted to instill in her son. As she neared the end of her story, Carol gently stroked Ethan's hair. She hoped that somehow, her words would seep into his subconscious, providing him with the courage and confidence he needed to face the world. With a final whisper of, "And the hero lived happily ever after," knowing he could overcome any obstacle, Carol planted a soft kiss on Ethan's forehead. She stood up, taking a moment to observe her sleeping child. In the dim light, she could see traces of the man he would become. Strong, kind, and resilient. With a silent prayer for his future, Carol quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. The following day, Ethan found himself in the bustling hallways of his school. As he approached his locker, he felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The noise of chattering students and slamming lockers seemed to amplify his anxiety. Ethan quickly grabbed his books and made his way to his first class, keeping his head down to avoid eye contact with his peers. During the morning lessons, Ethan struggled to focus. His mind wandered, and he found himself absent-mindedly sketching in the margins of his notebook. As the teacher's voice faded into the background, his pencil moved across the paper, creating intricate designs and fantastical creatures. When the bell rang for recess, Ethan hesitated. The thought of joining the throng of students in the playground made his palms sweat. Instead of heading outside, he found a quiet corner in the school library. Settling into a comfortable chair, he opened his sketchbook and lost himself in his art. As he drew, Ethan didn't notice a small group of classmates approaching. It wasn't until he heard a soft gasp that he looked up, startled to find 3 students standing nearby, their eyes fixed on his drawing. "Wow, Ethan, that's amazing," exclaimed Sarah, a girl from his math class. "I didn't know you could draw like that." Ethan felt his cheeks grow warm at the unexpected praise. He mumbled a quiet thanks and tried to close his sketchbook, but the others were already gathering around, eager to see more. "Can we look at your other drawings?" asked Mike, a boy Ethan recognized from the school's art club. "Your style is really unique." Hesitantly, Ethan nodded and reopened his sketchbook. As he flipped through the pages, his classmates' excitement grew. They pointed out details he had incorporated, asked questions about his techniques, and shared their own experiences with art. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan found himself engaged in a conversation that didn't fill him with dread. He even managed to smile a few times as he explained the stories behind some of his illustrations. When the bell rang to signal the end of recess, Ethan was surprised to find that he felt a twinge of disappointment. As they gathered their things, Sarah turned to him with a smile. "You should join the art club," she suggested. "We meet every Thursday after school. It would be great to have you there." Ethan nodded, not quite committing but feeling a small spark of interest. As he walked to his next class, he realized that his anxiety had lessened considerably. The weight that usually pressed down on his shoulders felt a little lighter. At the end of the school day, Ethan hurried home, eager to share his experience with Carol. He found her in the kitchen, preparing dinner. As soon as she saw him, Carol could tell something was different. There was a brightness in Ethan's eyes that she hadn't seen in a while. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today," Ethan began, his words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. He recounted the events of recess, describing how his classmates had admired his artwork and invited him to join the art club. Carol listened intently, her heart swelling with joy at seeing her son so animated. When Ethan finished his story, she pulled him into a warm hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Your art is a gift, and I'm glad you're sharing it with others." Encouraged by his mother's support, Ethan made a decision. "I think I might go to the art club meeting on Thursday," he said, a hint of nervousness creeping back into his voice. Carol smiled, recognizing the mixture of excitement and apprehension in her son's eyes. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "Remember, Ethan, your art is a part of you. When you share it, you're sharing a piece of yourself. It's okay to feel nervous, but don't let that stop you from exploring this opportunity." As they prepared dinner together, Carol gently probed Ethan about his feelings regarding the day's events. She listened attentively, offering words of encouragement and practical advice for managing his anxiety in social situations. That night, as Ethan drifted off to sleep, he felt a sense of possibility that he hadn't experienced before. His mother's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the strength he possessed. With his sketchbook clutched to his chest, Ethan allowed himself to dream of new friendships and artistic adventures that awaited him. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's artistic expression began to evolve. His sketchbook became a visual diary, filled with illustrations that reflected his inner world. Pages that once held simple doodles now showcased complex scenes, each one a window into Ethan's emotional landscape. One particularly poignant drawing depicted a small figure standing at the edge of a dark forest. Shadows with grasping hands reached out from between the trees, while a path of light cut through the darkness. Ethan had spent hours on this piece, pouring his anxieties and hopes onto the paper. Carol's nightly visits to Ethan's room continued, but now they took on a new dimension. Her stories, once simple tales of brave heroes, became more nuanced. She wove narratives of characters who faced internal struggles, mirroring the challenges Ethan grappled with daily. One evening, Carol sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, her voice low and comforting as she began a new story. "There once was a young artist," she said, "who could paint emotions. Each brushstroke captured feelings of joy, fear, love, and courage. But the artist was afraid to show these paintings to the world." As she spoke, Carol noticed Ethan's eyes growing heavy. She continued her tale, watching as her son drifted off to sleep, a small smile playing on his lips. These moments of connection had become precious to both of them, a nightly ritual that strengthened their bond. The next day, while tidying Ethan's room, Carol came across a drawing that took her breath away. It It depicted a fierce dragon locked in battle with a shadowy monster. The dragon's scales gleamed with determination, while the monster seemed to be made of swirling doubts and fears. Carol studied the image, recognizing it as a representation of Ethan's inner struggle. The dragon, she realized, symbolized the strength and courage her son was discovering within himself. The monster represented the anxiety and self-doubt he fought against daily. That evening, when Ethan returned from school, Carol decided to use the drawing as a starting point for a conversation about courage. She waited until after dinner, when they were both relaxed and open to discussion. "Ethan," she began, "I saw your drawing of the dragon and the monster. It's incredibly powerful. Can you tell me more about it?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then began to explain. "The monster. It's like the feeling I get sometimes, when everything seems scary and overwhelming. But the dragon, that's the part of me that wants to be brave." Carol nodded encouragingly. "That's a beautiful way to express those feelings. You know, we all have our own dragons and monsters inside us. The key is learning how to make our dragon stronger than our monster." This led to a deep conversation about fear and courage. Carol shared some of her own experiences as a nurse, times when she had to be brave in the face of difficult situations. Ethan listened intently, drawing parallels between his mother's stories and his own challenges. As they talked, Carol could see a spark of understanding in Ethan's eyes. He began to open up more about his anxieties, describing the thoughts and feelings that often held him back. Together, they brainstormed strategies for facing these fears, much like the dragon in Ethan's drawing faced the monster. "Remember, Ethan," Carol said, wrapping an arm around her son's shoulders, "courage isn't about not feeling scared. It's about feeling scared and doing something anyway. Your art shows that you understand this on a deep level." Ethan leaned into his mother's embrace, feeling a sense of safety and understanding. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. I think I want to keep drawing about this stuff. It helps me understand it better." Carol smiled, her heart swelling with pride and love. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Your art is not just beautiful, it's a powerful tool for understanding yourself and the world around you." As the evening wound down, Ethan returned to his sketchbook with renewed purpose. Carol watched from the doorway as her son began a new drawing, his pencil moving with confidence across the paper. She knew that this journey of self-discovery and expression was just beginning, but she felt hopeful about the path that lay ahead. That night, as Carol prepared for bed, she reflected on the progress Ethan had made. The shy, anxious boy was slowly giving way to a more confident, expressive young man. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was committed to supporting Ethan every step of the way, helping him nurture both his artistic talent and his inner strength. The following weeks saw a noticeable change in Ethan's demeanor. Inspired by the conversations with his mother and fueled by his growing artistic confidence, he began to step out of his comfort zone. At school, he found himself engaging more with his classmates, particularly those who had shown interest in his artwork. One day, during lunch break, Ethan mustered the courage to approach the table where Sarah and Mike, the students who had admired his drawings, were sitting. With a deep breath, he asked if he could join them. Their warm welcomes immediately put him at ease, and soon he was involved in animated discussions about art techniques and favorite artists. As promised, Ethan decided to attend the after-school art club. On his first day, he entered the art room with trepidation, his sketchbook clutched tightly to his chest. The art teacher, Ms. Thompson, greeted him with a kind smile and introduced him to the group. To Ethan's surprise, several students already knew him by name, having heard about his talent from Sarah and Mike. During that first session, Ethan worked on a collaborative project with his new friends. As they painted a mural together, he found himself relaxing, his brushstrokes becoming more confident with each passing minute. The chatter and laughter in the room, which would have overwhelmed him just weeks ago, now felt comforting and inclusive. At home, Ethan excitedly shared his experiences with Carol. She listened attentively, her heart swelling with pride as she witnessed her son's growing enthusiasm. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan," she said, pulling him into a warm hug. "You're really blossoming, and it's wonderful to see." As the weeks progressed, Ethan's artwork continued to evolve. His illustrations, once solely a means of expressing his inner turmoil, began to reflect a broader range of emotions and experiences. He started experimenting with different styles and mediums, encouraged by Ms. Thompson and his fellow art club members. During one particularly memorable art club session, the students were tasked with creating a piece that represented personal growth. Ethan found himself drawing a series of self-portraits, each one showing a slightly more confident version of himself. The final portrait depicted him surrounded by friends, his face lit up with a genuine smile. Ms. Thompson was impressed by Ethan's work. "This is remarkable, Ethan," she said, studying the series of drawings. "You've captured a real journey here. Would you mind if I submitted this to the district art competition?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his old insecurities threatening to resurface. But then he remembered his mother's words about courage and took a deep breath. "I'd be honored," he replied, his voice steady. When Ethan shared this news with Carol that evening, she couldn't contain her excitement. "Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with pride. "Your art is truly special, and I'm so glad others are recognizing that too." As they sat together on the couch, Ethan turned to his mother with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said softly, "I've been thinking about something. Your stories, they've helped me so much. I think I want to try illustrating some of them. Maybe we could make a book together." Carol felt tears prick at her eyes. This suggestion, more than anything else, showed her how far Ethan had come. Not only was he embracing his talent, but he was also finding ways to strengthen their bond through art. "I'd love that, sweetheart," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "That sounds like a wonderful project for us." As the days went by, Ethan found himself looking forward to school and art club meetings. His circle of friends grew, and he even started offering drawing tips to some of his classmates. The anxiety that had once consumed him was still present at times, but it no longer controlled his life. One afternoon, as Ethan was packing up his supplies after art club, Miss Thompson approached him. "Ethan," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice, "I have some news. Your self-portrait series? It won first place in the district competition. There's going to be a small ceremony next week to present the awards." For a moment, Ethan stood in stunned silence. Then, a wide grin spread across his face. "Really?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and joy. I don't know what to say." Miss Thompson smiled warmly. "You don't have to say anything. Your art speaks for itself. Congratulations, Ethan. You've earned this." As Ethan walked home that day, his steps were light, his heart full. He couldn't wait to share the news with Carol. He realized that his mother had been right all along. He did have strength inside him, and through his art, he was finally learning to let that strength shine. The evening of Ethan's award ceremony arrived, filling the air with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. As Carol helped Ethan straighten his tie, she noticed a slight tremor in his hands. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked gently, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. Ethan took a deep breath. "Yeah, I'm just a little nervous. There's going to be so many people there." Carol placed her hands on his shoulders, giving them a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, they're all there to celebrate art, including yours. Your work touched them, Ethan. That's something to be proud of." As they drove to the school, Ethan's mind raced with thoughts about his artistic journey. He remembered the countless nights spent sketching, the encouraging words from his mother, and the gradual building of confidence in art club. It all seemed to culminate in this moment. The school auditorium was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Students, parents, and teachers milled about, admiring the displayed artwork. Ethan's self-portrait series held a place of honor near the stage. As they made their way through the crowd, Ethan was surprised by how many people stopped to congratulate him. His art club friends gathered around, patting him on the back and expressing their excitement. Even some students he barely knew approached to compliment his work. The ceremony began, and Ethan found himself called to the stage. As he stood before the audience, certificate in hand, he caught sight of Carol in the crowd. Her eyes shone with pride, and she gave him a small nod of encouragement. In that moment, Ethan felt a surge of confidence. "Thank you," he said into the microphone, his voice steadier than he expected. "Art has been a journey for me. It's helped me express things I couldn't say with words. I want to thank my mom, who's always believed in me, and Ms. Thompson, who's pushed me to grow as an artist. And thanks to everyone in Art Club for their support." As applause filled the auditorium, Ethan realized something important. His art wasn't just for him anymore. It was a bridge, connecting him to others in ways he never thought possible. After the ceremony, as people mingled and admired the artwork, Ethan found himself deep in conversation with a local gallery owner who had been invited to the event. The woman, impressed by Ethan's series, suggested the possibility of featuring some of his work in an upcoming youth art showcase. Overwhelmed but excited by the prospect, Ethan sought out Carol. He found her chatting with Ms. Thompson, both women beaming with pride. "Mom," he said, his eyes wide with excitement, "you won't believe what just happened." As Ethan recounted his conversation with the gallery owner, Carol felt a mix of joy and a hint of apprehension. Her little boy was growing up, stepping into a world bigger than she had imagined for him. But seeing the light in his eyes, she knew this was a crucial moment for him. "That's incredible, Ethan," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. "I always knew your art was special." On the drive home, the car was filled with animated chatter as Ethan and Carol discussed the possibilities that lay ahead. As they pulled into their driveway, Ethan turned to his mother, his expression suddenly serious. "Mom," he began, his voice soft but determined, "I've been thinking. I want to do something bigger. Not just for me, but for others too. What if we organized an art show at school? Something that could showcase everyone's talents and maybe even raise money for art supplies for kids who can't afford them." Carol felt a lump form in her throat. The compassion and initiative in Ethan's suggestion touched her deeply. It was a testament to how much he had grown, not just as an artist, but as a person. "Ethan, that's a wonderful idea," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "It would take a lot of work and planning, but I think it could be amazing, and I'll be there to help you every step of the way." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his mind buzzed with ideas for the art show. He imagined the school gymnasium filled with artwork, students proudly showing their creations to family and friends. It was a big dream, perhaps bigger than anything he'd ever attempted before. But as he drifted off to sleep, Ethan felt a sense of purpose and excitement. In her own room, Carol sat at her desk, jotting down ideas and to-do lists for Ethan's proposed art show. She marveled at how far they'd come, from the nights of whispered stories to this moment of bold dreams. As she wrote, she felt a mix of pride, love, and a touch of bittersweet realization that her little boy was growing up. Little did they know, this art show would set in motion events that would challenge their bond and reveal long-buried secrets. But for now, in the quiet of the night, mother and son were united in their excitement for the future, blissfully unaware of the storm that lay ahead. The weeks leading up to the school art show were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan threw himself into the planning with an enthusiasm that surprised even Carol. He coordinated with Ms. Thompson and the school administration, designed flyers, and rallied his fellow art club members to participate. As the day of the event drew near, the school gymnasium buzzed with excitement. Students from all grades worked together to transform the space into a makeshift gallery. Easels were set up, walls were covered with display boards, and strings of lights were hung to create a warm ambiance. The morning of the show, Ethan woke up early, his stomach a knot of nervous energy. As he got dressed, he could hear Carol bustling about in the kitchen, preparing a special breakfast to start their big day. "Morning, sweetie," Carol said as Ethan entered the kitchen. She placed a plate of blueberry pancakes, his favorite, in front of him. "Are you ready for today?" Ethan nodded, managing a small smile despite his nerves. "I think so. There's just so much that could go wrong, you know." Carol sat down beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Ethan, listen to me. You've worked so hard for this. Whatever happens today, I want you to remember how far you've come. This show is already a success because of the effort you've put into it." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in Ethan's shoulders. As they finished breakfast and headed to the school, Ethan felt a growing sense of determination replace his anxiety. The gymnasium was already bustling when they arrived. Students were making last-minute adjustments to their displays. Parents were helping to set up refreshment tables, and Ms. Thompson was directing traffic, making sure everything was in its place. As Ethan moved through the room, checking on his fellow artists and making sure everything was ready, he caught sight of his own display. His self-portrait series held a prominent spot, along with several new pieces he'd created specifically for the show. Seeing his work displayed alongside that of his peers filled him with a sense of pride and belonging. The doors opened to the public, and soon the gymnasium was filled with a steady stream of visitors. Parents, teachers, and community members moved from display to display, admiring the students' artwork. Ethan found himself engaging with visitors, explaining his pieces and answering questions about his techniques. Carol watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride as she saw Ethan confidently discussing his art. She remembered the shy, anxious boy he had been not so long ago and marveled at the transformation. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan noticed a man spending an unusually long time at his display. The stranger studied each piece intently, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. Curiosity piqued. Ethan approached him. "Hello?" Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Ethan. These are my pieces. Do you have any questions about them?" The man looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Ethan, I was hoping to meet you. I'm David Lawson from the State Arts Council. I must say, your work is quite impressive." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. The State Arts Council was well known for its support of young artists. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson," he managed to say. "That means a lot coming from you." David nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I particularly love your self-portrait series. The progression of confidence and self-discovery is beautifully captured. Have you ever considered submitting your work to our Young Artists program?" As David explained the program, which offered mentorship and exhibition opportunities to promising young artists, Ethan felt a mix of excitement and disbelief. Was this really happening? Across the room, Carol noticed the intense conversation between Ethan and the stranger. She started to make her way over, curious about what was happening. Just as she approached, she heard David say, "Your talent is remarkable, Ethan. With the right guidance, you could have a bright future in the art world. Here's my card. I'd love to discuss this further with you and your parents." Carol reached them just as David was handing Ethan his business card. "Hello," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Carol, Ethan's mother." As David introduced himself and explained the Young Artist program, Carol felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in Ethan's accomplishments warred with a sudden, unexpected feeling of apprehension. The art world that David described seemed vast and intimidating, so different from the safe, nurturing environment she had always tried to provide for Ethan. As David excused himself to look at other displays, Ethan turned to Carol, his eyes shining with excitement. "Mom, can you believe it? The State Arts Council. This could be huge." Carol forced a smile, pushing down her conflicting emotions. "It's wonderful, sweetheart. You've worked so hard for this." As they stood there, surrounded by the buzz of the successful art show, neither Carol nor Ethan could have predicted how this moment would change their lives. The seeds of Ethan's future were being sown, but so too were the roots of revelations that would shake the very foundation of their relationship. The success of the art show marked a turning point in Ethan's life. In the days that followed, he found himself riding a wave of newfound confidence and excitement. The praise from David Lawson of the State Arts Council had opened up a world of possibilities that Ethan had never dared to imagine before. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table sketching ideas for new pieces, Carol watched him from the doorway. She marveled at the change in her son, the furrow of concentration on his brow, the sure strokes of his pencil, the air of quiet determination that surrounded him. It was a far cry from the anxious boy he had been just months ago. "Ethan," Carol said softly, not wanting to startle him. "Can we talk for a moment?" Ethan looked up, a smile spreading across his face. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" Carol sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking about Mr. Lawson's offer, the Young Artists Program. It's a wonderful opportunity, but it's also a big commitment. Are you sure you're ready for something like this?" Ethan's smile faltered slightly. "I thought you were excited about it too. Don't you think I can handle it?" "Oh, sweetheart, that's not it at all," Carol quickly reassured him. "I know you're capable of amazing things. I just want to make sure you're not rushing into anything. The art world can be challenging." Ethan set down his pencil, his expression serious. "Mom, I know it won't be easy, but this is what I want. Art, it's not just a hobby for me anymore. It's how I understand myself and the world. I want to see where this path can take me." As Carol looked into her son's eyes, she saw a determination and maturity that both thrilled and terrified her. She realized that Ethan was growing up, stepping into a world that was bigger and more complex than the safe cocoon she had tried to create for him. "Okay," she said finally, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "If this is what you want, then I'm behind you 100%. We'll contact Mr. Lawson tomorrow and see what the next steps are." Ethan's face lit up with joy. He jumped up from his chair and wrapped Carol in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best. I promise I'll make you proud." As Carol held her son, she felt a lump form in her throat. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, "you already make me proud every single day." Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Carol sat alone in the living room, lost in thought. She picked up one of Ethan's sketchbooks from the coffee table and began to flip through it. Each page was a window into her son's mind, his fears, his dreams, his growth. She paused on a particular drawing, one that showed a small figure standing at a crossroads, multiple paths stretching out before him. Carol traced the lines of the drawing with her finger, her heart heavy with a mix of pride and an inexplicable sadness. She was thrilled to see Ethan coming into his own, but a part of her mourned for the little boy who used to need her stories to fall asleep. As she continued to look through the sketchbook, Carol's eyes fell on a drawing that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a portrait of herself, rendered with loving detail. But what struck her was the way Ethan had captured her eyes. They held a depth of emotion that Carol hadn't realized was visible to others. In that moment, she saw herself through her son's eyes, and it both moved and unsettled her. The next morning, Carol and Ethan sat together at the kitchen table, ready to call David Lawson. As Ethan dialed the number with slightly shaky hands, Carol gave him an encouraging nod. "Hello, Mr. Lawson. This is Ethan from the art show," Ethan said, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "I wanted to talk to you about the Young Artists program." As Ethan discussed the details with Mr. Lawson, his eyes shining with excitement, Carol felt a mixture of emotions wash over her: pride in her son's accomplishments, joy at seeing him pursue his passion, and a nagging worry about the challenges that lay ahead. What Carol didn't know, couldn't have known, was that this phone call was setting in motion a chain of events that would unearth long-buried secrets and test the bonds of their relationship in ways she could never have imagined. As she watched Ethan talk animatedly about his future in art, Carol had no idea that her own past was about to catch up with her, threatening to shatter the life they had built together. The weeks following Ethan's acceptance into the Young Artists program were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan threw himself into his art with renewed vigor, spending long hours in his room working on pieces for his upcoming mentorship sessions. Carol, true to her word, supported him every step of the way, ensuring he had all the supplies he needed and offering encouragement during moments of self-doubt. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as Carol was tidying up the living room, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find a man she didn't recognize standing on the porch. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of a life filled with experiences. "Can I help you?" Carol asked, a hint of confusion in her voice. The man shifted uncomfortably. "Hello, Carol. It's been a long time. I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm Thomas Mitchell. We went to nursing school together." Carol's face paled as recognition dawned. She hadn't seen Thomas in over 20 years, not since. She pushed the thought away, forcing a smile. "Thomas, what a surprise. What brings you here after all this time?" Thomas glanced over Carol's shoulder, as if looking for someone. "I saw the article in the local paper about the school art show. Your son, Ethan, he's quite talented." Carol's smile faltered. There was something in Thomas's tone that set her on edge. "Yes, he is. We're very proud of him. But I don't understand why you're here, Thomas." Thomas took a deep breath. "Carol, there's something you need to know. Something about Ethan's father." Carol felt her heart drop. She glanced back into the house, making sure Ethan was still in his room. "Thomas, I don't know what you think you know, but now is not the time or place for this conversation." "Carol, please," Thomas persisted. "I've carried this secret for too long. Ethan deserves to know the truth about his father." Carol's eyes widened in shock. "What are you talking about? Ethan's father is—" But before she could finish, they heard footsteps approaching. Ethan appeared in the hallway, curious about the visitor. "Mom, who's at the door?" Carol quickly composed herself. "Just an old friend, sweetie. Why don't you go back to your room? I'll be there in a minute to see your new piece." Ethan nodded, giving Thomas a curious look before disappearing back down the hallway. Carol turned back to Thomas, her voice low and urgent. "You need to leave now. Whatever you think you know, you're mistaken. Ethan is my son, and that's all that matters." Thomas looked pained. "Carol, I know this is difficult, but you can't keep running from the past. The truth about what happened at the hospital all those years ago, it's going to come out sooner or later." Carol felt a wave of panic wash over her. The memories she had tried so hard to suppress came flooding back. The chaos in the emergency room, the critical patient, the mistake that had cost a life, and in the aftermath, a decision that had changed everything. "Thomas, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've built a life here. Ethan is everything to me. I can't lose him." Thomas's expression softened. "I'm not here to destroy your life, Carol, but secrets have a way of surfacing. I think it's better if Ethan hears the truth from you, rather than finding out some other way." As Thomas turned to leave, he handed Carol a small envelope. My contact information is in here. When you're ready to talk, call me. For Ethan's sake, and for your own, don't wait too long." Carol closed the door, leaning against it as her mind raced. The carefully constructed life she had built for herself and Ethan suddenly felt like it was built on quicksand. How could she tell Ethan the truth without losing him? How could she explain the choices she had made? "Mom?" Ethan's voice called from upstairs. "Are you coming to see my painting?" Carol took a deep breath, pushing down her turmoil. "Coming, sweetie," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady. As she climbed the stairs, Carol's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. The joy and pride she felt in Ethan's accomplishments now warred with the fear of losing everything. She knew that the truth would have to come out eventually, but how could she find the words to explain it all to Ethan? Entering Ethan's room, she saw him standing proudly next to his latest creation, a complex emotional piece that spoke volumes about his growth as an artist. As she praised his work and listened to him explain his techniques, Carol felt a deep ache in her heart. The bond between them, built on years of love and trust, suddenly felt fragile. That night, long after Ethan had gone to bed, Carol sat alone in the kitchen, Thomas's envelope on the table before her. The weight of her past pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. She knew that the coming days would test her in ways she had never imagined, and that the truth, once revealed, could change everything. As she finally made her way to bed, Carol paused at Ethan's door. Peeking in, she saw him sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that was about to break over their lives. In that moment, Carol made a silent promise to herself and to Ethan. No matter what happened, no matter what truths came to light, she would fight with everything she had to keep the love between them alive. Little did she know, the journey ahead would challenge that promise in ways she could never have anticipated. The following days were a blur of conflicting emotions for Carol. She went through the motions of daily life, making breakfast, driving Ethan to school, attending to household chores, all while grappling with the weight of her past threatening to surface. Every moment with Ethan now felt bittersweet, tinged with the fear that it might be one of their last peaceful interactions. Ethan, perceptive as ever, sensed that something was amiss. He noticed the dark circles under his mother's eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and how she seemed lost in thought more often than not. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, he decided to broach the subject. "Mom," Ethan began cautiously, "is everything okay? You've seemed different lately." Carol looked up from her plate, momentarily startled. She forced a smile, but it felt brittle even to her. "Of course, sweetie. I'm just a little tired, that's all. There's been a lot going on with your art program and everything." Ethan wasn't convinced. He set down his fork and looked at his mother intently. "Mom, I know when something's bothering you. We've always been honest with each other, remember? Whatever it is, you can tell me." Carol felt her heart constrict. The irony of Ethan's words, "We've always been honest with each other," hit her like a physical blow. She realized that the moment she had been dreading was upon her. She couldn't keep hiding the truth, not when it was clearly affecting their relationship. Taking a deep breath, Carol reached across the table and took Ethan's hand. "You're right, Ethan. There is something I need to talk to you about. It's about your father." Ethan's eyes widened. They rarely spoke about his father, and when they did, it was always in vague terms. Carol had told him that his father had passed away before Ethan was born, and Ethan had never pushed for more information, sensing it was a painful topic for his mother. "What about him?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carol closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage. When she opened them, she saw Ethan watching her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Ethan, what I'm about to tell you, it's going to be hard to hear, but I need you to know that everything I've done out of love for you." As Carol began to speak, her voice shaky but determined, she told Ethan about her past. She spoke of her early days as a nurse, of the night in the emergency room when everything went wrong. She explained about the patient who died due to a mistake she had made. "In the aftermath of that night," Carol continued, her voice thick with emotion, "I was lost. I couldn't face what had happened, couldn't bear the thought of the consequences. And then I found out I was pregnant with you." Ethan listened in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. As Carol continued her story, explaining how she had left her old life behind and started anew in this small town, Ethan felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. "But Mom," Ethan interrupted, his voice trembling, "what does this have to do with my father? You said he died before I was born." Carol took a shuddering breath. This was the hardest part, the truth she had buried deepest. "Ethan, the man I told you was your father. He was the patient who died that night in the hospital." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at his mother, shock and disbelief written across his face. "What are you saying?" he whispered. "I'm saying," Carol replied, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, "that I don't know who your biological father is. I was so scared, so desperate to start a new life, that I created a story, a lie that I've lived with for 16 years. Ethan abruptly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "So everything you've ever told me about my dad, about our family, it was all a lie?" Carol reached out to him, but Ethan stepped back. "Not everything, Ethan. My love for you, the life we've built together, that's all real. You're the most important thing in my life." But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His world had been turned upside down, and he felt as if he was drowning in a sea of confusion and betrayal. Without another word, he turned and ran from the room, ignoring Carol's pleas for him to come back. Carol sank back into her chair, her body racked with sobs. She had known this moment would be difficult, but nothing could have prepared her for the look of hurt and betrayal in Ethan's eyes. As she sat there, surrounded by the remnants of their unfinished dinner, Carol wondered if she had just lost the most precious thing in her life. Upstairs, Ethan threw himself onto his bed, his mind reeling. He glanced around his room, at the artwork that covered the walls, pieces that told the story of his life, his growth, his relationship with his mother. Now, all of it felt tainted by lies. As the night wore on, both Carol and Ethan remained awake, separated by more than just the floor between them. The truth was out, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. The foundation of their relationship had been shaken, and in the days to come, they would have to navigate the difficult path of rebuilding trust and redefining their bond. The days following Carol's revelation were filled with a tense silence that permeated every corner of their home. Ethan spent most of his time locked away in his room, emerging only for meals, which were eaten in uncomfortable silence. Carol tried several times to initiate conversation, but Ethan's responses were curt and distant. One afternoon, about a week after their confrontation, Carol knocked gently on Ethan's door. "Ethan, can I come in?" There was no response, but she slowly opened the door anyway. Ethan was sitting at his desk, surrounded by scattered sketches and half-finished paintings. He didn't look up as Carol entered, but his hand stilled over the drawing he was working on. Carol's heart ached as she took in the scene. Ethan's art had always been an extension of his emotions, and the pieces strewn around the room told a story of confusion, anger, and pain. "Ethan," she began softly, "I know you're hurting, and I understand why. But please, can we talk about this?" Ethan finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. What's there to talk about, Mom? You lied to me my entire life. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now? Carol moved closer, cautiously sitting on the edge of Ethan's bed. I know I betrayed your trust, and I'm so sorry for that. But Ethan, you have to believe that everything else, our life together, our love for each other, that's all real. Ethan's shoulders slumped. I want to believe that, Mom, but I don't know who I am anymore. My whole identity was built on a lie. No, sweetheart, Carol said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. Your identity is so much more than where you came from. It's who you are, what you've become. Your talent, your kindness, your strength. Those are all you, Ethan. For a moment, the tension in the room seemed to ease slightly. Ethan's expression softened, and Carol dared to hope that they were making progress. But then, Ethan's gaze hardened again. If you really believe that, he said, his voice low, then why didn't you trust me with the truth earlier? Why wait until now? Carol sighed deeply. I was afraid, Ethan. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of facing my past mistakes. But I realize now that by trying to protect you, I ended up hurting you more. Thomas looked from Carol to Ethan, understanding dawning on his face. You must be Ethan, he said gently. I'm Thomas Mitchell. I knew your mother a long time ago. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Did you know about me too? About the lie? Carol interjected quickly. Ethan, please, let's not do this now. But Thomas held up a hand. It's okay, Carol. I think it's time for the whole truth to come out. He turned to Ethan. I didn't know the full story until recently, but I suspected. That's why I came to talk to your mother. Ethan looked between Thomas and Carol, a mix of emotions playing across his face. I want to hear what he has to say, he said firmly. Carol hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She stepped aside, allowing Thomas to enter. As they moved to the living room, Carol felt a sense of both dread and relief. The truth was painful, but perhaps it was the only way forward. For the next hour, Thomas filled in the gaps of Carol's story. He spoke of the night at the hospital, of the chaos and the tragic mistake. He explained how he had suspected Carol's pregnancy, but had lost touch with her when she disappeared. As Thomas spoke, Ethan's expression changed from anger to confusion to something approaching understanding. When Thomas finished, Ethan turned to Carol. Is this all true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carol nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Ethan. Every word. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. Then, to Carol's surprise, he reached out and took her hand. I'm still hurt, Mom, he said softly, and I'm still angry. But I think I understand a little better now. Carol squeezed his hand, hardly daring to hope. Oh, Ethan, she breathed. Thomas watched the exchange with a small smile. Family is more than just blood, Ethan, he said gently. It's about love, about the people who stand by you no matter what. Your mother made mistakes, but everything she did out of love for you. Ethan nodded slowly, then looked at Carol. I need some time to process all of this. But I don't want to lose you, Mom. We've been through too much together. Carol felt a wave of relief wash over her. We'll get through this too, sweetheart. Together. As Thomas prepared to leave, he turned to Ethan one last time. Your art, Ethan. It's extraordinary. Don't let this situation dim your light. Use it. Channel your emotions into your work. The greatest art often comes from our deepest struggles. After Thomas left, Ethan and Carol sat in silence for a while, both emotionally exhausted but feeling as if a weight had been lifted. There was still a long road ahead, trust to rebuild and wounds to heal. But for the first time since the truth came out, there was hope. That night, as Carol passed by Ethan's room, she heard the familiar sound of pencil on paper. Peeking in, she saw Ethan hunched over his desk, working intently on a new piece. The sight brought tears to her eyes, tears of relief, of love, and of hope for their future. The truth had shaken their world, but it hadn't broken them. In fact, as Ethan's pencil moved across the paper, creating beauty from pain, Carol realized that perhaps this challenge would make them stronger than ever before. Their journey was far from over, but they would face it together, just as they always had. As they sat in silence, both lost in thought, the doorbell rang. Carol frowned, not expecting any visitors. "I'll be right back," she said, standing up. When she opened the front door, Carol was surprised to find Thomas Mitchell standing there once again. "Thomas," she said, her voice tight, "now isn't a good time." But before she could close the door, Ethan appeared behind her. "Who's this?" he asked, his curiosity momentarily overriding his anger.